Another day, another senior Trump White House official imprisoned by the Libs. First, it was Peter Navarro, President Trump's trade advisor, who is currently serving a 4-month sentence for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena. Then, of course, there's President Trump, the first former president ever to be convicted of a crime, a feat made all the more historic since the liberals can't even say what crime he committed. And now there's Steve Bannon, Trump's chief White House strategist, sent to jail like Navarro for ignoring a congressional subpoena, which is a very serious crime that only Joe Biden's Attorney General Merrick Garland is allowed to commit, as he explained on Tuesday.
We have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the committees get responses to their legitimate requests. But this is not one. To the contrary, this is one that would harm our ability in the future to successfully pursue sensitive investigations. Now, there have been a series of unprecedented and, frankly, unfounded attacks on the Justice Department. This request, this effort to use contempt as a method of obtaining our sensitive law enforcement files is just the most recent. The effort to threaten to defund our investigations and the way in which there are contributions to an atmosphere that puts our agents and our prosecutors at risk, these are wrong.
There you have it. It is wrong for the Congress to try to dominate the executive branch. It threatens the separation of powers, as Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon argued when they did the same thing that Garland is now doing. It's unprecedented, just as Navarro observed when he became the first senior White House advisor ever to be jailed for this supposed crime. It's June. It's June. And they've already put away 2 top Trump White House advisors. They're trying to put away Trump. Raises the question, how many more Trump White House officials do the Democrats plan to imprison before the election in November? I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Michael Knowles Show. Welcome back to the show. Did Joe Biden soil himself at Normandy? That is the question on everyone's mind. I actually have an answer to it. We will get to that story in just a moment. First, though, we've got to talk about Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Knowles. Once again, Pure Talk is investing in their customers with their own money and without charging you an extra penny. I'm happy to announce that Pure Talk is now providing international roaming to over 50 countries. As you plan your summer travel, make sure your wireless provider has you covered at home and abroad. Pure Talk already puts you on America's most dependable 5G network. Now they're offering coverage in over 50 countries as well. Enjoy the freedom of unlimited talk, text, and ample 5G data for just $20 a month with Pure Talk. This is a deal that is hard to beat, costing you less than half of what you'd pay with other networks. Not only is their US-based customer service team ready to assist you with a seamless switch, but they also have fantastic savings on the latest iPhones and Androids. Are you ready to make a smart switch? Join my cell phone company, Pure Talk, and start saving today. Visit puretalk.com/Knowles, Knowles, to explore their offers. When you make the switch, you will enjoy an additional 50% off your first month. Do not miss out on the opportunity to save on wireless at home and abroad. Visit puretalk.com/Knowles, Knowles. It is puretalk.com/Knowles, Knowles today. I actually have to issue a correction. There's a correction. I know this is fast, but I said that ignoring a congressional subpoena is a very serious crime that only Joe Biden's Attorney General is allowed to commit. But that's actually not true. Barack Obama's Attorney General also committed it because Barack Obama's Attorney General, Eric Holder, was held in criminal contempt of Congress and nothing happened to him. And he said it was wonderful. It was great to ignore the Congress in that case because to uphold the rule of law, we need to punish Republicans for crimes that they didn't commit in many cases. And we need to let Democrats off the hook uniformly for crimes that they did commit. It seems like an absurd double standard that they couldn't possibly get away with. They can't keep a straight face. They're going to straight face this thing all the way to November. And my proof of that is a June 5th story out of the New York Times. What is today's the 7th? Here's the headline, New York Times. Trump's vows to prosecute rivals put rule of law on the ballot. Donald Trump's promise to seek retribution challenges long-established norms. The election could hinge in part on what kind of justice system the country believes it has now and wants in the future. They convicted Trump, a week ago, and then will likely send him to jail in a few weeks. That was like a week ago that happened. They ordered Steve Bannon to jail yesterday. Peter Navarro is currently in jail. Not one hint of irony, not one little wink, a total straight face. Trump's vows to prosecute rivals put rule of law on the ballot days after Joe Biden not only prosecutes his rival, unprecedented in American history, but actually has him convicted and likely to be sent to prison. They're not playing around. There's no, I can't tell if they're extremely stupid or if they're being dishonest. And once again, I think the charitable take for the Libs is that they're lying. I can't imagine they're this stupid. They're lying, and I think they're trolling. That's the only reason you run this headline days after you convict President Trump and promise to punish him and probably send him to prison before the election. It's the only way, right? And yet they say the rule of law is on the ballot. So what does rule of law mean in this context? Rule of law is when the Democrats win. Just as democracy is when the Democrats win, just as freedom is when the Democrats win, just as equality is when the Democrats win, just all of these words that might at one time have had another meaning don't have that meaning anymore. You've especially seen this with democracy because the Libs say when most people vote for Trump, it's the end of democracy. When the people vote for Viktor Orban in Hungary, that's anti-democratic. When the people vote for Giorgia Meloni in Italy, it's anti-democratic. When the people vote for Brexit in the UK, it's anti-democratic. How can it be anti-democratic? Democratic is just what the people vote for. No. They've erased the real meaning of democracy. They've twisted that meaning, which is a phenomenon that they rely on a lot, which I discuss in Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. And they've twisted that to just mean the triumph of liberalism when Democrats win. But now they're doing that with rule of law. And it's funny because they're ignoring lots of laws. They're twisting certain laws. I mean, in the case of the Trump prosecution, at least the one in New York, they didn't even say which law he broke. They didn't even say which crime he committed when they convicted him. And the judge, when he was telling the jury how to proceed, said you don't even need to agree on what crime he committed. I don't know. Did he jaywalk in the 80s? Put him in an orange jumpsuit. So we can pull our hair out. We can say, imagine if the shoe were on the other foot. We can say, imagine if the roles were reversed. But just know, this is the way it works. Rule of law, when mentioned by the press or by the liberal establishment, just means when Democrats win. So at the very least, don't fall into the trap that they have laid for you of saying, well, I do, in fact, defend rule of law. That's not, they do not understand the words coming out of their mouth. And if they do, then they're intentionally lying to you. But that is not what rule of law means. They are going to win at all costs. It is June. July, August, September, October, November. Imagine how many more Trump White House officials they are going to put in prison before November. Speaking of attacks on right-wingers, and the UK, by the way, Nigel Farage was attacked with a milkshake on his first day on the campaign trail. We covered that Nigel, who is largely responsible for the Brexit, big conservative hero in the UK, he has turned his attention away from the European Parliament, which now doesn't really concern the UK, and he's focusing on the British Parliament, and he's running. And he's got this party, Reform UK. And his first day on the campaign trail, someone throws a milkshake at him. So Nigel was interviewed, and he says, I don't know what was thrown at me, but it hit me in the face, fair and square, quite frightening. And it is quite frightening. And it's not frightening because now he's got to have his suit dry cleaned. It's frightening because you don't know what's going to be in there when someone attacks you. This happened to me at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I was giving a speech there, and some wacko busts in through a fire door and sprays something on me. And we don't know exactly what was in it. At the time, people were saying it might have been bleach or some other toxic chemical. We don't know. It doesn't seem to have been toxic. All it did was really disrupt my blazer and my loafers. But you just don't know what it could have been. I did an interview shortly thereafter on Fox News, and I said, yeah, it's okay. It wasn't anything that poisoned me or anything like that. And Pete Hegseth, who was conducting the interview, he said, that's not the point. It could have been anything in there. And so Nigel is right to be frightened. But he was asked why he thought he had been targeted with a similar attack in 2019. And he said, it's quote, because I go out and meet the public. Nobody else does. What does Rishi do? Rishi is the head of the Tories, the kind of fake conservative party in the UK. He gets a room with 24 counselors or whatever it is. Nobody goes out and does the old style street campaigning the way I do. And this is the risk that goes with it. And it's quite scary. When he was asked, well, what if it had been more than a milkshake? Sometimes what Antifa would do is put concrete in milkshake containers, in cups, and throw it. So it looks kind of like a milkshake, but it could really, it could kill you, really. And Nigel said, that's a very tough question to answer. I try not to. So glad that Nigel's okay, but they're very scary. A major international conservative figure attacked his first day on the trail. But it's not just Nigel. Heinrich Koch, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, of the Alternative for Deutschland, the right-wing party in Germany, was just slashed with a box cutter. This is a municipal candidate for the AfD party. Was stabbed, slashed with a box cutter in the Western German city of Mannheim. And this was 4 days after a knife attack on members of an anti-Islam party in the same city. So this politician was taken to the hospital and he got stitches. Thankfully, he's expected to make a full recovery. But it's not just in the UK and it's not just in Europe, it's in America too. Let's not forget the liberal who traveled from California to DC to try to murder Brett Kavanaugh and potentially his entire family. And why was that? That was because the liberals released the Dobbs decision in advance of that decision coming out because it was obviously going to rile up the left. And if the left did succeed at murdering any of the conservative judges, then the decision wouldn't have gone through because they had such a slim majority. So that was the release of the Dobbs decision early was a call to murder one of the conservative judges. I don't think there's an ounce of hyperbole there. I don't see any other way you could possibly read it. And thankfully, there was a U.S. Marshal on hand to arrest the guy before he was able to murder Kavanaugh. But Alito, another conservative justice, had to leave his house during that time because of all the liberal threats that were in violation of the law that neither Merrick Garland nor the Virginia governor decided to enforce. Laws against protesting at the homes of judges. What about Rand Paul? Remember when Rand Paul's liberal lunatic neighbor broke one of his ribs, punctured one of his lungs, I think? Remember Steve Scalise when the Bernie bro showed up to the congressional baseball game and shot Steve Scalise, almost killed him? Remember Ashley Babbitt? To use a really extreme example of this, we heard about January 6th, the worst day in the history of the world, and all the Democrats were almost raped and pillaged and murdered. Remember the AOC said she was nearly raped. She wasn't even in the same building. And we heard about all the threats to the Democrats that day, and yet what did it amount to? One person died in the political violence that day, and it was one of the pro-Trump people in the Capitol. I'm noticing a pattern here. Are you noticing a pattern? All of the attacks on politicians are focused on the conservatives in America and throughout the rest of the world. The right is under attack. Under legal attack, there's a lot of lawfare, unprecedented prosecutions of a former president, current major party nominee, then more imprisonment, unprecedented imprisonment of senior White House officials for defending the separation of powers and executive privilege. And when that doesn't work, physical attack to try to kill the conservatives who stand in the liberals' way. I'm sure there is some counterexample that exists of a left-winger being targeted or killed, but I can't think of one. It's certainly not in recent memory. All the attacks seem to be focused on the right. Now, speaking of foreign affairs, we'll get to the big question, did the president soil himself at Normandy in 1 second. First, though, we've got to talk about Zero Debt USA. Go to zapmydebt.com. Does your debt keep you tossing and turning at night? The unfortunate reality is that our banking system is designed to trap you in debt. These insanely high-interest credit cards and loans make it nearly impossible to pay off your debt. Thankfully, there's a new way out of the debt trap with Zero Debt USA. Zero Debt USA, formerly known as Pivotal Debt Solutions, is not like the old-school debt relief companies that string your debt out for years. They have new, aggressive strategies to end your debt faster and easier than you thought possible. Zero Debt USA can cut or even eliminate interest. They will help find programs to write off your balances so you owe less. Bottom line is that Zero Debt USA will find every solution possible to end your debt permanently. Before you do anything, contact Zero Debt USA at zapmydebt.com. Talk to them for free. Find out how fast they can help you get out of debt. Very, very simple. Don't let it keep you up at night. Don't let it stress you out. Go to zapmydebt.com. Deal with that problem today. Get the best solutions possible. zapmydebt.com. Also, folks, this is very exciting. It probably goes without saying, I am the undisputed fragrance king of the DailyWire. Okay, the majority, virtually all the products I sell are combustibles. They're items that you light on fire and then you savor the aroma. So it makes perfect sense that I would be the one to tell you about the Candle Club. These are handcrafted candles that embody tradition and refinement. Each candle is thoughtfully designed to elevate your experience with curated selections, top-tier ingredients, and exclusive brands you won't find anywhere else. Each candle is hand-poured in Tennessee. And since I am the fragrance king of the Daily Wire, 2 of those exclusive brands are mine. You can check out new scents in the Mayflower Candle Collection as well as the Michael Knowles Collection. TheCandleClub.com. Make sure you put the in there. Pumpkin Spice Latte, the PSL candle. The Smells and Bells candle has been reformulated and it is real good. That was a really popular one. We said that was just a Lenten special. Well, we've got one. It's pretty close. Go check that one out. That is the Wise Man. And of course, the beloved best-selling aroma that transcends the ages. It's back again, thecandleclub.com. Pick a subscription plan that fits your lifestyle. Whether you're looking for a monthly indulgence or a seasonal refresh, you will find the perfect option to suit your needs. Right now, you get 30% off any candle, plus 20% more if you subscribe. Do not miss out on this early access deal to elevate your home with the sophisticated elegance of the Candle Club today. Did the president soil himself at Normandy? You see Biden, he's standing up, he shakes hands with Emmanuel Macron. He then moves to...
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd
kind
J.
of bends over, he kind of makes a bit of an odd face, and Jill is there. Now, the First Lady of France, the President of France, and the First Lady of the United States all standing up. Biden does this weird thing where he kind of sits down. So this was trending all over the internet yesterday. I came home because I was focused on some other work yesterday during the day. I was kind of out of the news. And Elisa says, Mac, are you going to talk about the Biden thing? I said, what now? She goes, well, people are saying he defecated in France. I said, what? It was trending all over the internet yesterday, man. I said, I have to look this up myself. And it was. So I said, wow, there's no way I can avoid talking about this, can I? She said, no, you can't. This is what our country's come to. This is very, very important news, man. So I said, okay, you're right. You're right, girl. I'll take a look into it, and I want to be fair-minded. And I examined all of the available evidence. I've come to the conclusion the president did not soil himself at Normandy. And here's why. If you look at the extended video, it is clear that he was in the process of sitting, not another process. See, she shakes hands with Macron. Then he's kind of
distinguished guests,
oddly kneeling. He's reaching for something. He's clearly reaching for the side of the chair.
Secretary of Defense of the United States.
And then they all sit down.
America.
The First Lady, both First Ladies, and then Macron. So if you look at the clip, if you even extend it by 5-6 seconds, he was sitting down. I love a good Biden joke as much as the next guy. That's not what he was doing. Now, the fact that this was a top trend, the fact that many people thought this was plausible, likely even, that Joe Biden did this at Normandy, it tells you a lot about his presidency, because there are always these kind of cheap political attacks, but they usually don't don't get much further than, the most extreme partisan fringes. But here we're talking about news that was really trending all day, because even Joe Biden's ardent defenders will admit he's past his prime, he's lost control of his faculties, and perhaps some of his other, not only his mental faculties, but some of his other faculties as well. So he avoided an international incident on the beaches of Normandy, but the political problem is still there. Now, that actually wasn't even the strangest thing that Biden did at Normandy. Biden sat down for a one-on-one interview with David Muir of ABC News, and he was asked about his son. Hunter is currently being prosecuted. Remember, the corrupt DOJ tried to let Biden off the hook. They tried to give him a little slap on the wrist that would have actually resulted in no long-term consequences for his many crimes that we've seen for years: sex crimes, drug crimes, financial crimes, political crimes. And a judge looked at this and said, this is so corrupt, I will not allow the DOJ to do this. So now they're prosecuting him for a gun charge. Raises the question, is Joe Biden going to pardon his own son? Here's Biden's answer.
Your son Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Okay. I think a lot of people might not have expected that. I certainly would expect this answer from Joe. Not because I think Joe cares about the rule of law, not because I think Joe is suddenly some great defender of integrity and principles, but because Joe Biden's a liar who's pretty good at politics. Say what you want about him. The guy's been in national politics for over 50 years. He got elected in 1971. He was actually, I think, too young even to enter the Senate at the time. He was only 34. And he's stayed in national politics pretty much uninterrupted since then, became the president of the United States several years after he seems to have died. So, he's a good politician. And he knows he can't say in the lead up to an election where prosecutorial misconduct and DOJ corruption is on the ballot. He can't say, yeah, of course I'm going to pardon my son. I suspect he will. I think he's probably just lying here. I mean, don't forget, for goodness sakes, Joe Biden has already wielded the government in a corrupt fashion to benefit his son. He bragged about this actually at the Council on Foreign Relations when Hunter Biden was being paid oodles and oodles of money from a Ukrainian oil company and natural gas company, Burisma. And it was just trading on the name and getting access to Joe Biden. When a prosecutor started looking into that corrupt deal in Ukraine, Joe Biden not only flew over to Ukraine and bullied Ukraine into firing the prosecutor, threatened to withhold $1 billion in military aid if they didn't fire the prosecutor, but then he went to the Council on Foreign Relations and bragged about it.
I remember going over, convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Put in place someone who was solidly not going to investigate my son's corruption. So obviously, Joe is probably just lying here. But one little coda to this story. If Joe is not lying, then I think he's wrong. If my kid were up on these kinds of charges, relatively low-level charges, don't forget, Hunter Biden is not being prosecuted for the really serious stuff he committed, the financial crimes, the political corruption, the graft, the selling American influence. Those are the serious crimes. He's currently only being prosecuted for the gun crime in relation to a drug crime, but not even directly for the drug crime. So I don't mean to diminish those things, but those are different levels of political significance. And if my kid were in serious trouble, and if he had shown signs that he had kind of turned his life around and he wasn't, going to Skid Row to do crack anymore, and he was kind of coming out of it, maybe to establish some kind of political principle, I wouldn't pardon him, but I'd almost certainly commute the sentence. Of course I would. And I assume Biden would too. I don't even really blame him for it. I blame him for all of the corruption that not only Hunter engaged in, but that Biden, according to Hunter, participated in. But no, I don't think it's that principle to leave your kid to hang out to dry to advance your political career. I'm sure he's lying about it, and he won't actually let his son ever see 1 second in jail. But I don't think it's good or principled to do that. I don't think it's good to just toss your kid aside to score political points. That's just me. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned. There are some unmistakable signs that summer is quickly approaching. I'm talking about beautiful nights enjoying Mayflower cigars on the patio, the cicadas around the house finally quieting down, stop flying into my head. The anticipation of season finales. Well, this Sunday, get ready for the grand finale of our inaugural animated sitcom, Mr. Bertram, exclusively on DailyWire Plus. Mr. Bertram, voiced and created by the one and only Adam Carolla, features an impressive lineup of talent, including Megyn Kelly, Roseanne Barr, Jay Moore, Tyler Fisher, Danny Trejo, and our very own Brett Cooper, and many more. The Mr. Bertram crew saved the best for last. Let me tell you, they're pulling out all the stops for this final episode. You will only catch it right here on DailyWire Plus. Here's the plan. If you haven't already started watching, spend the first part of your weekend binge watching the series now on DailyWire Plus. Then come Sunday, sit back, relax, and enjoy the finale of season 1 of Bertram. My favorite comment yesterday is from Steve Wesley 8187, who says, I pray my kids and grandkids won't let me vote Democrat after I'm dead. I know, I think we all have to pray for that. Now, oddly enough, then I'll move off of Biden. The potential soiling of himself, and then the Hunter Biden, I won't pardon my son answer. Neither of those really were the strangest moment for Biden the past few days. The strangest answer came when he was asked about Vladimir Putin, whom Biden claims he's known for 4 decades.
Let me ask you about what Vladimir Putin said last night about this authorization of American weapons inside Russia.
I've known him for over 40 years. He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator. And he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together while still keeping this assault going. We're not talking about giving them weapons to strike Moscow, to strike the Kremlin, to strike just across the border where they're receiving significant fire from conventional weapons used by the Russians to go into Ukraine to kill the Ukrainians.
So 40 years ago, Vladimir Putin was not in power. 40 years ago, the Russian Federation was still the Soviet Union. 40 years ago, I'm pretty sure Vladimir Putin was still a KGB agent. And Biden was a U.S. senator. Biden became a U.S. senator over 50 years ago. But is Biden saying that he knew Vladimir Putin when he was just some nondescript KGB agent? Possibly. I wouldn't put it past him. We know that the Democrats colluded with the Russians to cook up the Steele dossier to try to torpedo Trump's campaign, ironically claiming that Trump was colluding with the Russians. So I don't know, possibly. Probably, though, Joe Biden just doesn't care for the truth at all. He lies effortlessly, so much so that he has become a true cynic and probably just can't distinguish between truth and falsehood. And I think that was true even before he totally lost his marbles, and it's especially true now. That's the part of the interview that everyone's focusing on. That's the part of the answer everyone's focusing on. Oh, he says he knew Putin, but he didn't really know Putin then. He only knew Putin 30 years ago, not 40 years ago. No, to me, the craziest part of that answer is the defense of Ukrainians using American weapons inside Russian territory. There was a report I saw last night, I'm not sure if it's verified or not, that Russian warships are headed to Cuba in a replay of the Cuban Missile Crisis. That could be fake news. I don't know. I guess we'll see how it plays out. At the very least, though, Russia is threatening severe retaliation because that is an extreme exacerbation of what has thus far been a proxy war. We made it through the entire Cold War without Americans going into Russian territory and, firing weapons. Here, we're supplying the weapons to Ukraine. We're saying, okay, keep it focused on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and defending Ukraine, which is now basically an American proxy state, a satellite state. But they're saying, no, we're going to use it on Russian territory. How is that in the American interest? How is it in the American interest to greatly escalate a war with Russia over Ukraine, one of the most corrupt countries on earth, that has been a battleground for U.S. and Russian influence? And I think the Americans seriously misplayed their hand. And I'm not the only one who thinks it. Many very serious foreign policy analysts, including but not limited to Henry Kissinger, Sam Nunn, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and a number at George Kennan, the author of The Long Telegram and American Cold War Policy, all agreed. That's pretty scary, man. They told me if I voted for Trump in 2020, we'd get World War III, and perhaps they were right. I voted for Trump in 2020, and we might get World War III. Now, speaking of dubious deep state schemes, Senator John Kennedy, Senator Foghorn Leghorn himself, was just grilling the FBI director over the Epstein investigation. You remember Jeffrey Epstein? Jeffrey Epstein was this guy. He had a lot of money. We don't really know where it was from. And he invited all the most powerful people on earth to do weird sex stuff, often with underage girls. And then he videotaped all of it. And his business partner was connected to multiple intelligence agencies. And he was reportedly connected to intelligence agencies. And the whole thing was, and then it just kind of went away. Remember, we never found out really anything else about it. Even though all these really famous and powerful people went to the island, it just kind of went away. So Senator Kennedy raised that question to the FBI director. Here's the FBI director's answer.
What's the FBI doing to investigate the other people that were involved in these sex trafficking rings?
Well, I'm not sure that I can confirm any specific individual.
Well, let me put it this way. Let me give you some facts, widely reported. Jeffrey Epstein had video surveillance in all of his homes and on his private island. Do you have those tapes?
Again, I can't discuss the specifics of our law enforcement operations related to Mr. Epstein or Ms. Maxwell, but obviously we had very active investigation related to both of them. As to whether specific people are being investigated, that's not something that I, as I'm sure you can appreciate, can engage on here. We've devoted significant resources to the investigation.
Is it ongoing?
I'm not sure there's anything I can share with you on that, but let me see if we can get back to you and provide a little more information.
Well, for example, these allegations.
There it is. That's the best question of the whole exchange, because Senator Kennedy cuts to the heart of it. The way that these deep state apparatchiks get away with keeping the Congress in the dark, keeping the American people in the dark, just running the government on their own unaccountably, is they say, well, we're not allowed to discuss an ongoing investigation. Why don't we have the Nashville transgender shooter manifesto years later at this point? Well, there's an ongoing investigation. What's there to investigate? I think you investigated. No, it's ongoing. We can't share any information that might be politically damaging to the left. Okay. Why is it that we can't figure out who was on? You have the tapes, right? Oh, I'm not allowed to say. Well, we know you have the tapes. Can we find out who committed these really heinous crimes on the Epstein Island and in Epstein's other properties? Well, no, we can't do that because, we're not allowed to talk about ongoing investigations. Okay. Is there an ongoing investigation? I'm not allowed to say if there's an ongoing. Oh, okay. So you're just never going to tell us anything. Okay. That's fine. If you can't tell us that there is an ongoing investigation, at least, then we just have to take your word for it forever. There is no way ever to get any accountability if the justification for not releasing any of this information or prosecuting the people who committed the crimes is that there is an ongoing investigation. If you can't even tell us whether or not there's an ongoing investigation, then, okay, I guess we're taking your word for it, FBI director. Okay, yeah. I am not certain how many Trump associates will be imprisoned before the election. I'm not certain how many conservatives will be physically attacked or killed before the election. But one thing I'm really certain of is that we are never going to find out anything else from the official sources about Jeffrey Epstein and his operation. Now, the one little silver lining to this storm cloud of corruption is that the American people get it. They are very fired up about it. And they are putting their money where their mouth is, and they are donating to the man who is the symbol of resistance to that corruption. It's just how history has played out. And that would be Donald Trump, who has raised a lot of money since his conviction.
I just went through a rigged trial in New York with a highly conflicted, and I mean highly conflicted, judge, where there was no crime. It was made up, fabricated stuff. They didn't want to bring the case. They could have brought the case 7 years ago. It's only when you run for office they bring cases. But they would have done that 7 years ago thing, not in the middle of my presidential campaign, where we're beating Biden, by the way, by a lot. Did you see? And by the way, right after the announcement of this, more campaign funds were given to this campaign than any campaign, they think, in history. Almost $400 million. 400! No, it's never been, nobody's ever seen, because they know it was rigged. They know it's a corrupt system.
Yes, that is true. Because we're also talking about largely small dollar donations. Even me, I'm kind of a cheapskate when it comes to political campaigns. I'm not just tossing out money willy-nilly, in part because Shapiro, he promises my first paycheck's coming in the mail sometime soon. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I gave pretty big that night to the Trump campaign because I was so appalled, as were so many Americans. That's the bright side. The American people get it. Whether the American people still have a say in their government remains to be seen. Our mailbag is sponsored by Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Knowles, Knowles. When you make the switch, you'll enjoy an additional 50% off your first month. Take it away.
Swarthy Mike, bit of a lighthearted question for you today. I recently got engaged, and my fiancé and I have begun narrowing down possible wedding dates. For various scheduling reasons, January seems like the best bet for us, and we live in Arizona, so the weather will actually be rather nice that time of year. I always liked the idea of picking an easy-to-remember date for your future anniversaries, and of course, the choice was clear to me. January 6th, the worst day in the history of the entire world! My fiancée, for her part, is on board with this and happens to think it's as funny as I do. Is it any wonder I'm marrying her? Of course, this happens to fall on a Monday, and I'm worried some guests may be displeased at how much time off this would require. My question to you is simply this. Is it worth it to pick your wedding date based primarily on the lols? Again, my lovely bride-to-be thinks it's hilarious and is totally on board, but I'm wondering if perhaps it's a bit too silly to do this for such an important occasion. Your wisdom, as always, is appreciated. I've been listening since you were torturing Klavan with the Oscars, so needless to say, longtime fan. Thanks.
Do it. Do it. 100% do it. Are you kidding me? 100%. First of all, it will be helpful because as you are married for longer, you will maybe occasionally sometimes forget as your anniversary date is approaching. So it will be helpful to have a memorable date. I think my father was married on March 6th, 1999. So 3/6/99. Very easy to remember, right? Okay, that's good. It would be harder to remember even I don't remember, my own birthday half the time. So that is good stuff. It's really funny. It proves that your wife is super cool. That's great. And even in terms of taking off time, yeah, it is annoying having gone to non-Saturday weddings before. It's annoying when people do that. But people do it. I've seen Friday weddings. I've seen Sunday weddings. I've seen Thursday weddings. And it's annoying. At least for the Monday wedding, that means people are flying in if they have to travel. The rehearsal dinner is on a Sunday night. Okay, so you got Sunday off for travel. You don't have to take that day off. The wedding is on Monday. So it's true. You do have to take Monday and Tuesday off from work. It's annoying. It's a destination wedding that often involves taking time off, but people could leave very early Tuesday morning. They could probably be back in the office Tuesday at lunch, depending on where they live. Do it. Congratulations. I hope you have a great wedding and a great marriage, but do it. Next question.
Greetings, Mr. Knowles. I have asked this question before, but it has never gotten answered, so I'm hoping this time I'm successful. I know you are against President Biden forgiving student loan debt blanketly, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Act, which was passed a long time ago, where essentially if after a person graduates they work for any government entity or a nonprofit, such as a church, that after 10 years of making payments, whatever remains of their government loan is forgiven. I myself am eligible for this and have been working for my county courts for the past 9 years, so my loans are due to be forgiven next year, hopefully. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts on this act are, being essentially people like me have been paying it back, but then also have been working for the government. Thanks.
I think it's good. I have no problem with it in principle. And I think, unlike a lot of the 1980s style conservatives who just wanted to privatize everything, I actually don't think that always works. And actually, one of the downsides of privatizing everything in modern life is that we've just empowered lots of even less accountable, very liberal people to control our public square. We deregulate communication, and what happens? 3 leftist corporations, totally unaccountable to the people, control the public square. So I think in principle it's good. The question, though, is what do you want to incentivize? What serves the common good? Law is an ordinance of reason for the common good by him who has care of the community and promulgated. That's St. Thomas Aquinas' definition of law, and I think it's a pretty good definition of law. So what is being advanced here? If you can discharge your student debt by going and working for the church or some missionary organization, or I don't know, some right-wing community organizers, you go work for TPUSA or something, then great. I'm all for that. That's good. But if the effect of that is only going to be getting more and more people to go work for the left-wing organizations and go work in the government, that, as leftists, that would be a bad thing. Now, if we could incentivize conservatives to go work in the government and wield political power, that would be a good thing. So to me, I would just judge the wisdom of that policy by who is going to take advantage of it and how. You obviously are a reasonable person and you're working in the government. So good. I want more reasonable people working in the government. Fine by me. You gotta make sure that the policy isn't hurting the conservatives. Next question.
Hey, Nostradamus, this is Greg, longtime listener of the show. This is my first time submitting a mailbag question. In light of the topics you've touched on with Tony Soprano and Jerry Seinfeld referring to, tough old men and bringing back masculinity and sort of the old school way of things, I do find myself agreeable to that. But I want to let you know that I'm actually going through a program right now where a lot of men are submitting questions to you about how do I quit porn? And this program in particular dives deeply into the psyche and having compassion for yourself and trying to deal with things like guilt and regret and shame that revolve around porn addiction. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on, is there a place for masculine men to still dive into these things, like with his family, with his wife? Or do you think that we should still just be burying this stuff down in tobacco and other substances that sort of take the edge off? My thoughts are that it's not so healthy, but I'd love to hear yours. Thanks for taking my question and keep up the great work.
Good question. A slight correction. Tobacco, used properly, is not a way to beat down your emotions or get through the day. It is an expression of joy and delight and relaxation. That's just what, it's not just the guy huffing and puffing the cigarette just to get through his shift. It's, sitting back, reading a good book, talking with friends with a nice Mayflower cigar. Just a little distinction. Men can talk about their feelings in limited circumstances. It's fine. And men certainly could speak to other men about this. I think that's a good thing to do. I don't think you really ought to burden your wife with your problems. I think that is kind of lame and effeminate. I don't think you say, oh, honey, I'm just having so much trouble all the time. That, I think, no. We need the Gary Cooper strong silent type. Because your wife is a different kind of person than your best friend or your colleague or your boss or your priest. So what you say, should we just, use tobacco or say alcohol or something to just numb our pain? No, I think we should avail ourselves of sacraments. I think that's going to be much more effective than whining to your wife or drinking a lot or something. This is not to say that you can't tell your wife that you're an imperfect man and you struggle with all sorts of things. Because, I imagine if you've got this one addiction, you've probably got other addictions and other vices that you're falling into too. It's very rarely just one thing. It's because it's like when Adam and Eve fall. The way that John Milton describes this in Paradise Lost is that sin and then death pervade the world. It just gets into everything. I was talking to Adam Carolla one time about a somewhat related matter, and he said it's like radon. Like having an annoying wife. That was the topic of the conversation. He said it's like radon. It just pervades the whole house. You don't even really notice it all the time. It's just kind of there, and that's what sin is like. So I think you can be honest about that, but your wife will know that when you go to confession, which you should do regularly. That's going to be much more effective. You can have the support groups and whatever kind of programs you guys are in. That's good stuff. I'm all for that. But it's not a substitute for ultimately the person you should bring your problems to, which is God, and I would recommend in the form of sacramental confession, on your knees, in the box, to a priest. I think that is, because the priest is sitting there in the person of Christ, and you're confessing your sins of God, who ultimately is the only person who's really going to help you. Next question.
Hi, Michael. Huge fan of the show. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks for taking my call. I had a question for you about marriage. When my wife and I got married just over 5 years ago, we had our anniversary last week. Politics was not really on the radar of our relationship. But after 2020 and the riots and things, my wife self-describes that she had some sort of political awakening and has become increasingly liberal since then. I wouldn't say she's a full-blown leftist, but definitely heading that way. Thinks abortion should be legal up to a certain point, even if restricted. She's not a fan of BLM, but still believes in the systemic racism, sexism. Thinks we should affirm transgender people, hates on Israel all the time. And it's just becoming more and more difficult to navigate that. So would love some advice on what to do, if anything. Thanks.
The problem is not that your wife's a Democrat. I've seen wonderful marriages where the husband's a Republican, the wife's a Democrat or whatever. The problem is that this different view, this emerging different view, represents something much deeper than just one political issue or another. It represents not only a different view on life, but an increasingly different view on life. What you're describing is that your wife and you are growing apart at a deep level, which is dangerous. So I'm glad you sent in the question. The first thing you got to ask is, well, I would lead with confidence and with love, of course. So your wife says she supports abortion, but not, it ought to be restricted at least. That's a totally incoherent answer, right? Either it's murder or it's not. So if it's murder, it shouldn't be permitted. And if it's not murder, there's no reason to restrict it really. You could just talk that over with her and say, well, here's why I think what I think, and you could get at it that way. With the BLM stuff, I guess you could just talk to her about it, say, yeah, except it isn't really true, and it's kind of fake, and here's why, in a very loving way. But then the question I would ask is, where is she getting this from? You said it happened during the BLM riots. It was her political awakening. But what was the efficient cause of her supposed political awakening? Was it some friend? Was it spending too much time on social media? Was it reading the New York Times all the time? Was it this? Was it that? You got to find that cause, because if your wife is just spending all day on Facebook and Twitter, that might be really bad for her, and you might need to step in and gently suggest, knock it off with the Facebook and Twitter. If it's some friend, if it's some problematic friend who's turning your wife against her husband, you got to reduce the time that friend is hanging around. I think you've got to identify the efficient cause here and then lead with love, but don't ignore it. As you say, politics wasn't a big deal when we got together. Right. And it doesn't need to be. Who cares about the politicians? It's not for everybody. But practical politics is just like the tip of the iceberg. And what practical politics expresses is views on practical morality. And what views on practical morality express are views on the whole moral order. And with that, when you get down far enough, that's going to express what you think about human nature, existence, and God. And so that's a big thing, especially when you're raising kids, as you're crafting any kind of life together. You can't ignore that. To quote the butler on the first season of The Crown, it's in the little things that the rot begins. So don't freak out. Don't lose your mind. Don't get angry. Lead with love. But you got to fix it. You got to fix that. The rest of the show continues now. You do not want to miss it. Become a member. Use code Knowles, KNWLES, at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans.